Hey there, it's Margee Moore. I've got Tim Rettig from InTrust IT, formerly and now from 3LS, on our next episode of Cincinnati Entrepreneurs Unplugged, where real EO Cincinnati members lay it all on the line with their worst nightmares and their greatest successes. Thank you, Tim, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Margee. I've got a lot of both of those, so looking forward to share.
Great. Okay, so first of all, could you just tell us a little bit about your current business and your former business?
Yeah, so I started InTrust in '92 while in college, 30 some years ago, and it morphed into over time into an IT support and cybersecurity company, really focused on the cloud, which in '92 didn't exist, but over time became something that we focused on. It became 30% employee owned in 2019 and 100% employee owned in 2025. I stepped down as CEO at the end of last year. So I am now the former founder, former CEO of InTrust, and what I'm doing now, I'm working part-time for an ESOP holding company, which is an employee-owned organization that owns multiple subsidiaries. So my employees now, instead of just owning stock in InTrust, they own stock in a dozen or so other companies that this holding company is part of. So it's a way to diversify employee ownership, but still provide all of the full benefits you get being the owner of the company you work for. So I'm really proud of that exit and where it wound up, and looking forward to helping that organization grow further as I help them, part-time in my second stage of life here.
You're such a great advocate for employee ownership. I think it's wonderful. So we'll get right to the nitty-gritty. Can you share a significant setback in your entrepreneurial journey, something really of a big setback?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of them, but one that comes to mind in reading the question beforehand was at one point I had two other partners. So let me rewind a little bit. So I started the company in college. About 4 years into growing the company, I dropped out of college. Was running the company on credit cards and was having difficulty providing benefits for my employees. Trying to figure out 401k and health insurance and those types of things to keep employees working for me. So I was voicing my frustration to one of my largest clients, and he said, I tell you what if my company bought your company, we would provide all those benefits to your employees. We would do all your billing and back office and everything, and you can just focus on the technology. So it sounded like a great deal to me. So I wound up selling the company. This is 4 years after starting it. I stayed on as division president. They kept my company as a division of theirs. So we were autonomous, and everything that he had promised came true. And I stayed for 11 years in that role and grew the company further. But he wasn't the owner of the company. He was just the president. He retired 11 years after that transaction. And I really didn't fit with the larger organization. So I wound up buying the company back at that time. And to make that happen, I needed a little more cash than I had. So my general manager wound up joining me in the transaction. So we became partners. I was a majority partner. She was a minority partner. And then about a year later, we met a gentleman from Chicago who had a company similar to ours, where there was a lot of good synergies between the two of us, and we wound up acquiring his company as well, and he came on as partner. So very quickly, I went from running the show to having two other partners. And we sat down and started doing strategic planning after this transaction, which was the wrong thing to do. We should have done it before the transaction. And we quickly realized that Ricky, who was the partner from Chicago, and I had very similar ideas where we want to take the company and aspirations of growing into multiple locations and kind of conquering the Midwest from Cincinnati to Chicago and all areas adjacent. But Megan, the third partner, she just wanted a lifestyle business. She didn't want to work very much, beyond the normal 40-hour week. She didn't want to put any more risk anything further in terms of any additional investments or anything like that. She just thought we should just keep what we have and keep running it and kind of use it as a cash cow, more or less. So it definitely caused us to come to head some disagreements there, but we continued. We came to compromise between the two plans, to go out and conquer the world that Ricky and I had, and let's just keep what we have. Megan, we kind of wound up in the middle, compromised, and we started moving forward. We thought everything was going really well, but what I didn't realize is in the two transactions that, buying the company from the larger company, buying it back, and then buying Chicago. We had racked up some debt. And as a lot of business loans are, they are amortized over a certain period of time, but a lot of times you have to renegotiate the terms after a 5 or 10 year stint. And I think this was a 3 or 5 year note. I can't remember what the term was exactly, but it was coming due and we had to renegotiate with the bank. And Megan was in charge of that relationship. And she kept coming back with meetings to us and saying that she couldn't find a bank that was willing to refinance the debt. And, it kind of got to the point that months went by and we kept getting the same news from her. There's nobody out there that'll take our debt. I don't know what we're going to do, et cetera, et cetera. So I talked to my father, and he had a great relationship with Lebanon Citizens National Bank, put me in contact with the president there and had a meeting and sat down with the president. And I was like, here's the situation, and he's like, oh, where's the debt at? And I was like, well, it's with Huntington. And then he pulled up a UCS report, which lets him look at kind of what our debt looked like. And he's like, well, you still have debt with Chase from Chicago as well. And I was like, well, that was supposed to be refinanced and pulled into our term loan in Cincinnati. And he's like, no, it's still out here. So I quickly went to Huntington and met with them. And I was like, hey, I just met with LCMB and they're telling me that we have this debt from Chase out there. I thought that was financed into and they said, oh no, that wasn't done because we're still waiting on approval. And by the way, we've also provided a proposal to refinance your existing loan with better terms. And, Megan hasn't approved this. And I was like, well, what are the terms? And we looked at the terms and they were exactly what we were looking for. So I'm like, is this still valid? And they're like, yeah, you still have another, I think it was like 2 weeks before that offer was going to be not available anymore. So wound up having a come to Jesus meeting with Megan. And what we found out is that the reason that she kept trying to go out and shop our debt to all these different banks is every bank that she met with was requiring us all to, have our assets tied to the loan. And she didn't want that risk. She didn't believe the company was going to be able to survive. And she was trying to remove the lien from her house. So she was just kept trying to find a miracle out there, and that didn't exist. We're in a service business. We have no assets. The company doesn't really have much beyond some furniture and computers, which both depreciate very well or very quickly. We didn't own any property or large manufacturing equipment or anything like that. So had to come to Jesus meeting with Megan and wound up forcibly removing her from the company because in our operating agreement, there was some statements that if somebody puts the company at risk, then we have the ability to execute this clause to remove them from the company and buy them out. So that's what we wound up doing. And then she wound up getting an attorney and we wound up getting an attorney. A couple of months went by of negotiations and we wound up coming to an agreement. And the good thing is we were able to get the loan with Huntington and refinance all that debt that we have and had to get another loan to then pay Megan out over time. But I was able to do all that and make that happen. So there was about another 6-9 months or so where it was a big struggle with cash flow and everything because of the refinance and needing to start to pay her out. But we were able to quickly dig our way out of that and come out on the other side, much stronger company and with a better direction after all that. So that was a long story, but it was a lot of complication. But what I learned from there is from that point forward, I always owned the relationship with the bank and had made sure I was the majority owner at the time anyway. And the reason that Megan kind of by default became the one that had the relationship with the bank is because she was more finance focused and was doing the accounting work where I was on the tech side and those types of things. So after that situation, I wound up always having a really close relationship with my banker. I was the one having the quarterly meetings and going over the finances with him and got much more familiar with what our finances look like. And that point forward, never fell into anything like that again.
That's great. That's great. You kind of answered some of my next questions, like the impact on the business. How did it change your approach to leadership? You took over the bank. So what specific strategies or resources did you employ to overcome that obstacle? Or I guess I kind of like want to know more, like, how did you grow from there? Like, you've just restructured, now you're two partners. What happened to the next? Right? And these are all great lessons for the entrepreneurs. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, so I had another fun story with another partner. So Ricky, the remaining partner, he stayed on for about 18 months or so, and then when he went on a extended vacation, like a 2-week vacation, like he just needed like a hiatus, and he came back from that, and we were talking on the phone, a couple of days after he got back, and he's like, I need a break. And I was like, break from this phone call, a break from what? He's like, I need a break from this, this company. And he's like, I'm thinking about doing something else. Can I just be a silent partner and you just take over from here? And I was like, that's not what and he was pretty much running the Chicago location at that point, because we had acquired the company in Chicago. I'm in Cincinnati, and I have grade school kids at home. I didn't want to be in Chicago. At that point, I was going to Chicago about once a month, which was about the extent of what I was comfortable being away from home. And I didn't want to be up there any more than that. So after some conversations, we decided what would make the most sense is for us to sell the Chicago location, because we had a company that was interested in it anyway. So he sold that. I used the proceeds to buy him out, and he exited the business. So it left me just with 100% employee ownership, which that was probably the best thing that could have happened. Not 100% employee ownership, but 100% ownership.
Yeah.
But that was probably the best thing that could happen, because at that point I had no other partners to answer to. I could get rid of a lot of the compromises that I had had up till that point, and there were a lot of things I wanted to do that when you've got sometimes a partner that has different opinions than you wind up with kind of in the middle in terms of what you want to do with the business. So that's when in 2012. Pretty much rebooted the company. We were doing some staffing services. So we were like putting people out 100%, 40 hours a week in companies, which is difficult to keep your culture when you're doing that, because you're not managing them. They're being managed by the company where they're placed. So we got rid of all that business. We had a web application, web design company division that we had, got rid of that. We had an app dev group that I also divested. So let me focus on the cloud. At that time was just starting to take off. This was 2012, and cybersecurity. So rebooted the company, changed the name from InTrust Group to InTrust IT, because there was confusion in the market. It looked like we were like a financial services company, and rebranded it and focused on the cloud and cybersecurity. And I went from like 50 employees at the time by divesting all that and getting rid of the people that we had placed down to about 12. So, and that's when I told the employees that my goal is by 2020, I have an 8-year plan that we want to become employee owned, 30% employee owned company. So it rallied the employees around that goal. I had to do some education with what that means, because they don't understand that they don't have to invest or anything like that. There's nothing they have to put at risk. It's just the profits of the company are going to be buying the stock for them. So that turned into when my company really broke through a lot of the plateaus and the profitability issues that it had in the past, by me getting all the employees involved in the finances and the success of the company.
Great. I'm going to jump ahead to a question. I know you often have a lot of great resources around that, such as books you recommend and stuff like that. What are some books you'd recommend to help people learn more about that?
Yeah, so the first one that made the biggest difference for me was The Great Game of Business by Jack Stack. I implemented that system in 2014, so 12 years ago now that we implemented that. And the reason for that is I was talking to my father, who exited his company via an ESOP as well. And I asked him, what's something you would have gone back and done differently if you could have? And he said that he would have had the employees know the finances before they became the owners of the company. So I had heard about Great Game of Business prior and always wanted to implement it, but because I had partners that felt uncomfortable doing that, we never did it. Now I don't have any more partners. It's just me. I did have to convince my leadership team that this is, made sense. And the pushback they gave me was, well, we have a bunch of computer nerds working in the company. They're not going to care about finances. They're not going to be able to understand numbers, and this is never going to work. So I'm like, okay, well, let's think about it. And I wound up going to Great Game of Business, had like a conference, and I went to that conference, and one of the speakers there owned a plant nursery in Canada, and 80% of his employees were immigrants that were non-English speaking that worked in the fields. and he had implemented Great Game of Business and had taught financial literacy training to non-English speaking immigrants. So I came back from that conference and I was like, look, if this guy that has immigrants working in the field for him is able to get them to understand financial literacy and get together and run Great Game of Business to the point that they were so successful that he was at this conference speaking, I think that we can get some computer nerds to understand finances. So we used a book called The Accounting Game, which is kind of like a workbook. It's on the front cover, there's a picture of a lemonade stand. So it's not called Lemonade Stand Accounting, but that's what it is. In there, it tells the story of you starting a lemonade stand and borrowing $5 from your parents. You take a piece of paper and you put a line down the middle, and on the left side, you say that you have $5 in the bank, and on the right-hand side, you say, I owe the parents $5. That's your first balance sheet. So it really gets your employees to understand what a balance sheet is, and then what a P&L statement is, and what a cash flow forecast is, and what depreciation is, and all those terms they've heard and they don't quite understand what they are, because it's brought down to such a simple level of them running a lemonade stand. Just like a little kid, all of our employees go through this. We've turned it into, you can just have them do the book themselves. But what we did is, it's an 8-week program. It's an hour a week for 8 weeks. And over time, I was teaching it initially. And then my VP of Finance, who's now the CFO, has always taught that over the last few years. So yeah, that's how we've used that to get everybody to understand our finances.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're always so inspired by you and we're, as a team, we're reading Great Game of Business week by week. We're going over one chapter at a time as a team, and different people on the team rotate going over what was in the chapter. So we took that from you. So we love it. Yeah. So we asked some of your worst times. Let's ask about what was like a great time or a pivotal moment that things were really great, or you knew things were going to go in a great direction.
So as part of the Great Game of Business, there's a quarterly bonus program in there, and it's based on, what I like about it is you set a threshold for the company, what the profitability of the company needs to pay its debts, to be able to reinvest in the company and those types of things. And then you can decide above that threshold, what percent of that profit you want to distribute to the employees. So the benefit there is, if the company only makes a small amount of profit, you're not sharing in profits that you need for the company to survive. So I like how they're structured. So we put that in place. I think it was 2015. I think it took us a year to implement and do the training, and then start the profit sharing. And every year, it was like, the first year was 5% of their salary. So it's based on a percent of salary. So that somebody that makes $100,000 a year is going to get twice the profits, twice of somebody that makes $50,000 a year. So it's nice in that regard, and gets them to better understand it. The other thing we do is we communicate what that is equivalent to in vacation days, because if they want to, they could take additional vacation that would be non-paid, and they would use their profit sharing money to supplement the time that they're not paid. So far nobody's done that, but it is a nice way to say, hey, this is equivalent to 2 weeks of additional vacation time, even though 2 or 3% may not sound like much. When you say that's equivalent to having another 2 weeks of vacation, so they kind of understand that. So we're paying you additional 2 weeks, and you don't have to work it. However you want to look at it. But we started that, and it was like 5% the first year, something like that. And then it was like 10% the next year, and 12% the next year. We got all the way up to 20% of a salary. I think it was 2019. So somebody that's making $100,000 a year, they're getting a $20,000 bonus as part of from that. So somebody making $50,000 a year, they're going to get $10,000 bonus for the year. So it's paid out quarterly, so they don't get it all at once. So it's a quarter of that every year. Quarter every quarter. And those were some amazing years to see that, year after year after year increase. So that was 2019. So that was amazing. Now, 2020, we didn't have any bonus. And that was because we had, as everybody did, some big disruptors that year. With COVID, we wound up keeping everybody employed, even our salespeople, which were struggling to do new sales. And because of that, our profits decreased significantly, but it allowed the company to keep everybody. We didn't lay anybody off, and it made us stronger for the next year, when we actually did 3 acquisitions in 2021 and started the company growing again from that point forward. So yeah, and I can credit a lot of that to that Great Game of Business profit sharing because of the fact that when you do have great years, you're sharing it with the employees. And when you do have a down year like 2020 was for us, it allows you to conserve cash. And it's not the other thing that's really nice about Great Game of Business, their profit sharing. It's not that you get to the end of the year and the employees get a surprise check and they don't know what it is. Yeah. It's every single week you're updating a forecast and showing what you think the profit sharing is going to be for the year. So they can see it and they get paid every quarter. And by them being involved and contributing to the success of the company, they have control over their bonus. So it's not, just something the company or the owner is deciding willy-nilly at the end of the year. He feels like it. He's in a good mood. He's going to give a bigger bonus than not. And it's something that the employees can plan on. So even though in 2020 we didn't have a bonus, the employees knew about that, in March and April. We could start seeing things happen. Yeah. So they were able to start planning, and it wasn't a surprise throughout the year. People weren't happy about it, and there was a lot of people saying, what can we do? But there was a lot of, I'm glad we have this in place and everybody gets to keep their job, and we're still in a good place at the end of the year.
Yeah, and that sounds like, may sound complicated, but I think, chapter by chapter, the book's going to get you through, like learning this part, then learning that part. And so I've enjoyed all of this advice. I'm going to skip on to like almost our second to last question. What is like a piece of advice that you would give to an entrepreneur just starting their journey?
It's funny. I just had the same question. I was just in Japan, and I had a tour guide that took one night. There's a bunch of different tours you can go on, and this was just like a restaurant tour where you go to different restaurants. I wound up being the only person on the tour. It was supposed to be small. It was supposed to be up to 6 people, but I was the only person. So it was me and a guide, and the guide was a 21-year-old in college in Japan, in Tokyo. And so we wound up, he wanted to know what I did for work and all that kind of stuff. And he was asking me all these same questions. So what I told him is, for me, my company really, hiring the first 10 people, getting the first 10 people was easy because I was providing a service at the time that was hard to come by, and there was a lot of demand because when I started in the mid-90s, there were a lot of companies just starting to put computers in, and they needed a lot of assistance and help and support doing that. So my services were really needed. So I went right up to about 10 people very quickly. And I hit that plateau, and it took me a long time. I think it probably took me 10 years where I was stuck at that plateau because I wanted to manage everything and I wasn't good at delegating. So I think my advice for any entrepreneur starting out is, as soon as you can start figuring out how to delegate things, that's a really good skill to have, because if you're wanting to control everything, it's very difficult for you to grow your business. Now, these days, it's even easier to delegate because you can delegate to AI agents and automation and other things as well. And there's a lot of people that are available through like Upwork that you can delegate to. So it's gotten much easier for delegation for sure. But that is a great skill to have and something to really focus on, because if you want your company to grow and for you to have time as well as money, that delegation is a huge thing to focus on.
Wonderful advice. And this will be my last question. What's some unconventional advice you've heard along the way, or something funny you want to share like that?
Unconventional. Well, for me, what was unconventional that I did, and I've done a bunch of unconventional things. One of my employees said, sometimes it feels like I'm Willy Wonka, or this is kind of like the chocolate factory, just kind of. And we even, one of our core values, not really core values, one of our sayings in the office is, embrace your Willy Wonka, is sometimes the weird things, the weird ideas are the ones that stand out and do things that really set you apart. So a couple of things I did right when I was starting out that made a difference, which these aren't going to work today, but back then were very unique. So the first thing that we did is when I started, I was in college, and all the people working for me were also in college. They were friends of mine, and we were doing a lot of computer cabling, running cables between computers, because back then a lot of offices weren't wired for computers, connecting computers to computers for local area networks back in the day. This is before the internet. And one thing that people did not like is electricians on ladders climbing around while they're sitting there working and pulling cable and everything else, and disrupting them and needing to take their computer apart to put a card in it to connect it up to the network. So we went to those companies, and what I used to set myself apart is we said we will do the computer cabling at night and on the weekends for the same price as people will charge you to do it during the day. We'll do it at nights on weekends because we're students going to school during the day, and we'll work on nights and weekends. So I got a ton of business from that because of that. And actually, the initial name of my company for the first 6 months or so was Night Owl Connections, and that was one of what we focused on. But I pivoted after that. And the other thing I did back then, which is not unique anymore, but my business card, my phone number for the company was my cell number. And again, this is 1992, so probably 2% of people had cell phones, and nobody gave their numbers out because back then you're charged by the minute for calls. So, and it didn't say cell phone, it just had it just looked like it was the office number. So what would happen is they would buy their computers from Computerland or Micro Center. Micro Center didn't even exist then, so it was all the precursors to that. They buy their computers from Gateway or wherever, Dell. I don't even know that Dell was around then. And we would put the wiring in and connect them up, and then they'd have a problem with their computer. And back then there wasn't really support that came with your computer. You had to kind of figure it out or go on a bulletin board or something like that. And if they called the computer store where they bought the computer, they didn't really have a help desk. It was kind of like figure it out on your own. So they would call me, they would call the number on the card, and I would pick up pretty much 4 hours a day. Again, that's common today, but back then wasn't. And I would help them with a computer problem. So very quickly, within 6 months, my company changed from doing computer cabling to doing computer support because I saw that that was a bigger need. So finding that unique need, so which first was computer cabling at night was a unique need, and then the second thing I discovered is people really need computer support, and that doesn't exist. So that's a higher margin thing that we can provide. We can provide it 24/7, and we can do a heck of a good job with it. So I very quickly pivoted to that and started reducing my class load because I was skipping class to do support calls and run out and fix people's computers. So yeah, I don't know where. So there's some unique things that I had done along the way back then. So I'm sure there's a lot of other unique things that could be discovered these days as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thank you so much, Tim Rettig, for joining us today for Cincinnati Entrepreneur Unplugged. It's been a great episode. We appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Margee. I appreciate it. Bye.